Hello and welcome to the Richard Hunter interview, where I sit down with guests who know the city best to talk about the trends, triumphs and turmoil that affect your investments. Once again, I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Murphy, Investigations Editor of the Financial Times. So Paul, let's pick up from where we left off last time. So when you go into a story or investigation such as Wirecard, taking on effectively a corporate giant, how much can you prepare yourself for what might follow?
It comes to, you work on different levels. The first one is legal. Okay, the fact is, almost every story we tackle now in terms of investigative work has legal pushback in some way. It might be our own legal team who's saying, no, this breaches privacy, this breaches confidentiality, the subject matter will quite easily get an injunction here, and it's something we want to avoid. We don't want the courts to stop us. So you have your internal legal considerations. Then you have your external legal considerations. You have to work out we had to work out how Wirecard were going to respond to what we were publishing. And that was quite bizarre because, what they did was they turned around and they convinced the kind of Munich prosecutor that Dan and also another colleague, Stefania Palmer, were actually criminals. And the Munich authorities launched a criminal investigation of those two, which is something you can't really prepare for. You also obviously have to think of security. If I'm frank, before we tackled Wirecard, we were really a little bit slack in terms of our kind of, our cybersecurity, our technological kind of protections, and we had to learn quickly. We operated on the basis that Wirecard did have access to things like our emails. We knew that they had some kind of shady connections with, Secret Service in Austria, possibly Russia. It's quite draining because you have to do things like, every meeting we have to leave phones outside. You do have to check that you're not being followed when you're kind of moving around London. It's quite draining. And also, I think it does genuinely have an effect on your families, actually. As a journalist, it's quite exciting, all right? Lots of people have said, it must have been terrible, you're being kind of surveilled and what have you. Well, actually, it was an exciting story. We knew we were right. We knew this was a criminal enterprise, and it was just a matter of time before we cracked it. But, I know for Dan's family, my own family, everybody gets paranoid and you kind of worry about kind of, whether you're being kind of monitored at home, children, etc. So, yeah, it's a bit draining.
Although, of course, you were vindicated in the end. I'd like to move on, if I may, to FT Alphaville, which you were founding editor for in 2006. The live market slot very much and very quickly became a go-to for city professionals, let alone new readers, as well as interested investors, of course. Can you tell me what the latest is on Alphaville?
Well, Alphaville, I'm very proud of Alphaville. It's great fun to work on Alphaville. All right, it's a very flexible media platform that allows you to move very quickly, and it's especially it's a brilliant outlet when events are moving very quickly, as they are at the moment. And Alphaville has always been, it's reinvented, almost reinvents itself every few years, depending on the team who are working on it. So I was the first editor. Neil Hume took over from me, who you may know Neil. It was then Isabella Kaminska. Izzy left just over a year ago, and Robin Wigglesworth, one of our most senior kind of and experienced investment correspondents, has taken over quite recently, and he's remoulding it around his new team. So it's quite exciting days for Alphaville, because what Alphaville is able to do is, whereas the broad FT newspaper as I mentioned earlier, has to cater to this very broad readership. Alphaville is able to say, look, we are read by market professionals, and so we can use shorthand. We know that you know what a kind of a collateralized debt obligation is, or whatever the kind of slight technicality is. Alphaville doesn't have to hang around and explain it to you. It can go straight directly to the story. The team on Alphaville know that they're writing for professionals, and that those professionals actually know much more about any given subject than the reporter does. And that's a healthy a healthy balance, I think.
Absolutely. Turning back to your day job as investigations editor at the FT, Wirecard has obviously shown you're not restricted to the UK in terms of your investigations. You mentioned Singapore earlier. Are there other jurisdictions you're currently investigating?
Well, our focus is global, and when we move with the stories. When we were covering Wirecard, as it was in its kind of last days and facing collapse, I used to have chats with the team and saying, look, this has been an amazing story. This is big, but this will not be the biggest collapse of this cycle. We've had 12, 13 years of effectively free money, and finally, after all these kind of years, the tide is eventually going out, and I expect us to see some truly colossal frauds and crises. We're already seeing that right now. We've seen it over the past year. We saw FTX collapse. What was that, 32 billion? I mean, recently I've been watching The Gold on BBC TV about the Brinks-Max robbery in the 80s. And what was that, $26 million? At the time, that was a lot of money. But the kind of, the decimal points have shifted like kind of three or four kind of points. I mean, we're talking, billions. And we look at some of the kind of, some companies, I don't want to name some of them because we're still looking at it. But, if you look at areas, across the Middle East, across kind of Asia, there are some truly kind of fantastical valuations attached to some businesses. And you have to look at these. You have to see whether there's actually anything there. The crypto world, it's, that's a world where people have got used to just kind of inventing value out of thin air. And where that leads us, I don't know. Well, actually, I kind of do know. Where it leads is to, a lot of kind of naive and innocent people losing their money.
And I wanted to pick up on themes as opposed to jurisdictions. You mentioned crypto. They're also short sellers tend to get something of a bad press. Are those areas of interest for you?
Short sellers have always fascinated me. I mean, my deep background is actually very much as an equity market reporter. And, from my earliest days as a journalist, I used to kind of, look to kind of develop and maintain good contacts with short sellers for a very simple reason. Well, no, a few reasons. One, they tend to be interesting characters, all right? They can tend to be oddballs, obsessive. But crucially, a short seller will tend, in my experience, to do much, much deeper research on their speculative investments than a regular, long-focused analyst. And that's for a simple reason, that they're, if you're buying a stock for whatever, $10, you can only lose $10. But if you're shorting a stock at $10, your potential downside is unlimited. The stock can go to the moon, and it does. You see, you see how the kind of short focus funds, say betting against Tesla, have just been annihilated.
Yeah.
You know, there's many examples of that. It's been for short sellers. You know, this zero interest rate era has been terrifyingly bad. You know, it's been really, really tough for them, and suddenly it's their moment. We're seeing that with Hindenburg at the moment, who targeted Adani in India recently, and who are now targeting Square, or Block as it's now known, Jack Dorsey's entity. At the same time, journalistically, we have to be careful, because we can easily be seen as being kind of in cahoots or encouraging short sellers. And so the relationship on a kind of quite technical level can be very tricky, because, you know, if you're a short seller, you know, you've identified your target, you've set up all your trades, you're short, your book position is very clear. And the tendency, if a newspaper like the FT just comes along and reports what you've discovered, at that moment, you're essentially, you know, all other things being equal, you know, the short seller is going to be closing their position, and you're just enabling a transfer of value from, you know, your readers, FT readers, subscribers, to the short sellers in closing their position. And that's something we grapple with. Our solution is either to work with the short seller from a very early stage, when they're just kind of probing a potential target, as we did with Wirecard. You know, Dan was talking to shorts who were focused on Wirecard all the way back in 2014, 2015. Or we wait until somebody like Hindenburg has published their full report, and then we put a lot of resource into going to kind of verify their research. Because if they're right, then it's not just a kind of 1 or 2 day story. It's something that will develop into something much bigger.
Now, finally, Paul, obviously Wirecard did reveal, thanks very much in part to you and your team, that the Emperor had no close, despite some eye-watering market valuations at the time. Will there be others, do you think?
Almost certainly. You know, as I've said, you know, we've spent such a long period in this extraordinary era of zero interest rates. You know, I talked to my team about the fact that, you know, you had 12 years of free money. It's also a time when you've had a massive tech bubble, and it's also an era where we've seen genuine internationalization, just not of capital, but also of management teams. You know, nobody bats an eyelid if you have, you know, a group of Swiss entrepreneurs listed on NASDAQ with assets somewhere else. From the perspective as a financial journalist, all of that just adds up to fraud. And so, yes, I expect us to be very, very busy over the next kind of year or two.
Well, it's been absolutely superb. Thank you for your time, Paul.
No, thank you.
Most valuable and fascinating insights. And thank you for watching. I'll be back soon with another Richard Hunter interview. And of course, in the meantime, you can subscribe to our Interactive Investor YouTube channel. So thank you for watching once more. Bye for now.